Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another EI Live K-12 session for students and educators. My name is Adrienne, and I work on the EI communications team. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Earth Institute, our core mission is to foster a greater understanding of the science behind climate change and sustainability, and what we as global citizens can do. Experts that make up the Earth Institute include economists, business and policy experts, specialists in public health, and earth scientists. The Institute is made up of more than 24 or so research centers and several hundred people who collaborate across many departments and disciplines at Columbia University. What we're hoping to do with these EI Live K-12 sessions is to introduce you all to our interdisciplinary work through our scientific experts. We're going to have weekly sessions until the end of June, and if you'd like any information about upcoming sessions, please do not hesitate to contact me directly. So today, we're very lucky to have two presenters with us from Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory, the largest research center of the Earth Institute. Margie Turrin and Laurel Zaima are going to be speaking to us about climate impacts and specifically about local impacts you might see as a result of global climate change. They will do their presentation and we'll have about 10 minutes at the end of the session for Q&A. Please use the Q&A box for questions and we'll be sure to monitor that. We'll also have a colleague from NASA GIS come on after Margie and Laurel are done to share some additional resources that they have. And with that, why don't we get started? Margie and Laurel, over to you.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. My name is Margie Turrin. I'm Director of Educational Field Programs, and my colleague.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laurel Zaima, and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator.
Great. And so today what we don't have a lot of time, but what we wanted to do was really dig into a couple of amazing resources that help us to really think about how to deal with some of the changes that are coming our way with climate. And they're not going to hit us all the same way. You know, every single part of our country and around the world will be affected differently. And so really knowing how to create the change that's needed to most effectively deal with offsetting some of the changes in our area, as well as being prepared to deal with them, is what we want to try to focus on today. And we're going to really zoom into the National Climate Assessment, which is a really well thought out and beautifully put together tool that's very accessible for all ages, as well as the toolkit, which was put together by NOAA to accompany that climate assessment. So we're going to get started, and we probably can't really deal with talking about resilience without really going into what is climate change and what really is climate, to be honest. So we're going to start by just stepping in backwards. I'm hoping that you're all on the same page with us, but the differences between weather and climate, and again, we won't spend a lot of time on this, but weather is something that's very dynamic. For example, today, many of us are looking at rain. We might not have expected to see a whole day of rain given the weather that we've been having the last few days, but it's here. But that's not climate. Climate is looking at long term, so 30 years or more of a change in a pattern that affects a specific area. So we're going to focus in on that climate. And so what causes Earth's climate to actually change? So there are definitely some natural factors that can go into driving climate. And some of those are long-term and some are shorter term. So some of the longer term ones can be just how the Earth rotates. It can be looking at things like the wobble of the Earth, the distance from the sun. All of those affect things on thousands of years to even longer. Whereas things like a volcanic eruption can affect climate on a very short term. So if we have a volcanic eruption, it puts particulate matter into the atmosphere, and that can block the sun, and it can cause our climate to change. But we know that humans are a big factor in the climate change that's going on now. So if we go to the next slide, we'll just kind of look at this schematic, which I expect is familiar to a lot of you. And basically, this is showing us the greenhouse effect. And so the sun is the main driver of our climate. It sends down energy, which reflects back in large part off the surface of the Earth. But as we have added greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we have created what's called many refer to anyway, as a heat trapping blanket. So these greenhouse gases make it very difficult for some of this energy to move out again into the upper atmosphere, and it just returns down to Earth, and it's causing us to kind of warm up. And so here's a really very visual way of looking at how we have impacted our climate. So if you look at these four main human drivers of climate change, it would be the burning of coal, the burning of oil, the burning of gas, and then just the manufacturing of cement, which also adds a large amount of carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So these are four pieces that humans have contributed. And this graph goes from 1850, when we really started to see the uptick of the industrial world. So when we really turned to this use of energy in a very high use way. We're going to go to the next graph, and we're going to look at just confirming, again, here's the evidence of how carbon dioxide is related to temperature. So if you look at this graph, and again, it's for a comparable period, this is 1880 to 2020, and we're looking at temperature on the y-axis on the left and carbon dioxide on the y-axis on the right. And you can see that as we drive up our carbon dioxide, there is an accompanying increase in temperature. And it's a very accelerated when we get into the early 1960s and on up. And you can see that that incline is very, very steep. Again, just showing you some of the evidence of how we know that we are a factor, a driving factor in our rapid climate increase. Okay, so that's just like the quick primer on climate, which we felt was important to just start with. And now we're going to turn to some of the tools that we have available to us. So the National Climate Assessment is something that we really wanted to share with you and talk about. I don't know how many of you have spent time in it, but it's an incredibly valuable resource, and it's extremely accessible. And this looks like a fairly boring page, but in fact, when you get into the assessment itself, it's a very dynamic, very visual kind of way to dig into some of this. So here you'll see national topics. And so that looks across topics, things that really affect broadly a number of different regions of the United States. So things like human health or water supply. These are all really important things that climate is going to have an impact on. And then you can go to actual regions. So we can take the United States and break it into big chunks and look at what are the impacts going to be in some of these bigger chunks of the United States. So on the Northeast coast, for example, or let's look at the Southwest, because of the fact that they're kind of combined into an area, they tend to have very similar impacts. And so it's a great way of just kind of looking at things and being able to think about them in a very geographic way. It also helps to put these into block regions because it encourages different states to actually work together. So the idea that every individual state needs to be doing something is important, but we get stronger as we work together. And so being able to couple those states together to really look at how they can create change is important. And then you'll see as part of this report, there are responses and appendices. So there's a lot of stuff here, some great graphs and some great graphics. And I'm going to turn it over to Laurel.
Okay, everybody, we are going to get you actively engaged now. So take out your phones if you have it, and you can scan this QR code. It's going to take you to something called Mentimeter, which kind of takes everyone's thoughts and answers and puts it into a word cloud. And what we want you to input, you have 3 different entry options to pop in. What are the impacts of climate change? First 3 things that come to your head, and then we're going to look what everyone wrote. So go ahead, do that now. I'm also going to take the URL and just pop it in the chat for anyone who is on their computer today. Okay. And so while you are all working on that, I'm just going to pop this up here. And as you start populating these answers, you're going to see the word clouds start to form. And the way that this word cloud works is the more people that choose the same type of answer, the bigger the word becomes. So you can see the most common answers out of the group. Okay, here we go. So we have the first entry, hurricanes, sea level rise, heat. Awesome. All right, we have flood impacts, flooding, and movement. I love it. Good job. And that can be, I'm assuming, movement of people, movement of animals, movement of plants as they migrate to new areas. Okay, we have increase in natural disasters, decrease in biodiversity. What was the other one that was added? Oh, sea level rise. So rising sea levels and sea level rise, the same. Drought, absolutely. Awesome. Oh, and drought's getting bigger. So more people have put that answer in. It's hard to tell what's new. Oh, desertification. So tied with drought. Yeah, so, and some of these seem to be correlated and some might seem opposite of each other. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. If there's any last minute entries, go ahead, pop them in. Okay, great. So I think ecosystems will definitely be impacted in different ways. So thank you for popping that in there. And natural disasters. Okay, great, guys. There is a lot of overlap in your answers, which is wonderful. And, you know, Margie and I were just kind of having a discussion about some of these impacts that are felt all over the world and all over the United States. And you hit on a bunch of them, but here is a list of some other impacts that we thought of. Not an exhaustive list by any means, but some common ones include heat and drought, which you guys hit on, wildfires, increased intensity of tropical storms, heavy precipitation, which is one of those that kind of seems counterintuitive to heat and drought, but things are happening in different places. Mudslides, extreme winter weather, melting of land ice, sea ice, and permafrost, sea level rise, coastal erosion, ocean acidification, changes in snowpack, loss of biodiversity, invasive species, and species migration. Whew, it's a lot of impacts. And so you guys absolutely hit on a bunch of these. Thank you so much for participating. While all of these are climate change impacts, they're not felt the same throughout the country. So we are going to, as Margie had mentioned, the National Climate Assessment splits up the country based on climatic geographic regions. There are 9 that we are going to focus on today here. We're not going to focus on the US Caribbean today, but we wanted to break you up so you each had a stake in a different region. So you are all going to be assigned to an area based on your birthday month. So if you're December and January, you are the Northwest region, February, March, Southwest, April, May, Northern Great Plains, June, Southern Great Plains, July, Midwest, August, Southeast, September, Northeast, October, Alaska, and November, Hawaii. So go ahead. There's a poll that just popped up. I would love for you all to just pop in which region you are going to be representing based on this key. Margie, can you see this poll as well?
I can't see responses now.
Okay. Okay, so we have 2 more people that need to vote, and then I'll pop it in. Oh, actually, perhaps we are the 2 people. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll. And you guys can see that we are not perfectly evenly distributed, but that's okay. So Northern Great Plains, there are a lot of people that are born in April and May. So happy early birthday. And Northwest, Midwest, Northeast. Awesome. Thank you, you guys. We don't have anyone representing Alaska or Hawaii or the the Great Plains, but we're going to be hitting on those, and you guys can just kind of take, or the Southwest, ooh, and that's a big one. So you guys can just be taking some mental notes. Maybe you have some relationships to these areas if you have family members that live there, but it is important to consider all areas of the US. All right, so when we're thinking about building resilience in the US, the US Climate Resilience Toolkit outlines these 5 steps to think about. So first, you have to explore the hazards of your area because not all areas are being impacted the same or in the same way. Then assess the vulnerability and risk, which seems very similar to exploring the hazards, but this takes into account the social area, the infrastructure, how many people are living in an area that could be impacted by a hazard. So it goes into a little bit more of the social economics of that area and how it could be impacted by the hazard. Then you have to investigate your options. So what are some of these solutions? And you have to kind of weigh them because there's always going to be some cost benefit to every solution that you implement. Prioritize and plan. So this is kind of like the planning stage, and ultimately take action. And that requires a lot of collaboration with partners, communities, state level, and international as well. Okay, this is a graph that kind of breaks down how different areas are impacted. There's a lot to look at, so you guys can just follow along with me here. So we're going to look at A first. This is looking at annual average temperature change since 1900. So you can see the more red it is, the increase in temperature in degrees Fahrenheit change that is going to be. The more blue, it's decreasing in temperature change, like to the negatives, or if it's completely white, it is relatively no change. So you can see all areas of the US are being impacted differently. Some areas are really increasing in temperature and some are decreasing, which is kind of interesting and maybe something that you wouldn't have expected. However, as a whole, we have increased in 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit since 1900. So overall, there is that global warming that we're seeing across the country. If we pop down to D here, we're looking at changes in Western US snowpack. So, you know, the North and Southwest really rely on snow because it provides meltwater to recharge aquifers and provide groundwater. So people rely on this, not just for tourism purposes and to drive the economy, but also for water security. So with increases in drought in this area, they're going to be seeing less snowpack, which could be detrimental for them. And this is kind of all over the area. There are some spots that could be increasing, but an overwhelming amount are decreasing in snowpack. If we pop over to F and G, we're looking at the Arctic sea ice extent. And that's going from about 1980 to a little past 2015. And while there is some variability, the overall trend is decreasing. So we are losing that Arctic sea ice. That is indirectly correlated with sea level rise. So if you think about sea ice, it's already in the water. So it's displacing the amount of space that it would once it melts. So it wouldn't contribute to sea level rise directly. But if you think about sea ice, it's bright and white and it reflects a lot of heat away from the earth. So if we lose this sea ice, we're opening up a really dark ocean that absorbs a lot of heat and can create a faster warming impact. So it exacerbates heat in the Arctic region. So that in turn can drive sea level rise because the warmer it gets in that area, now we're going to be sea melting from land ice. Once that land ice is melted, it flows into the ocean and can increase sea level. So if you're looking at G now, from 1920 to 2020, we're seeing this increase in sea level rise. So that's going to be felt differently throughout the world as well, but global sea level rise is rising. If we look at I, we're looking at ocean acidification. So the scale is a little bit backwards, but you're going from a more basic, a more basic number. So higher pH is more basic to a lower pH, which is more acidic. So it's showing that there is an increase in ocean acidification in Hawaii throughout this time scale. And this is something that we're also seeing in different areas of in the ocean as well. And the last two, I just wanted to pop to show how different it is throughout the US. The change in growing seasons because our climate is changing impacts our food security and agricultural productivity throughout the country. So some areas are seeing a decrease in their growing seasons. like in the Southwest, or Southeast, sorry. I don't think we have anyone who's representing the Southeast, but a little bit of the Midwest maybe. But then there are other areas that are actually seeing a longer growing season. So these impacts, are not felt the same. And then overall, the US wildfires are increasing, and that's primarily in the west side of the United States. So I wanted to share one tool that we're just going to use an example, but you can also explore it on your own. It is the ACIS climate maps. So this is a great visualization of data across the United States for a variety of different parameters. So if you open up this, it says select product, you can see all these different data sets that you can click on and see a visualization for. So the first one we are looking at is departure from normal temperature. And that means when you're thinking about climate change from this long period of time, you have to reference it against an average. So when they say normal temperature, they're looking at an average from 1981 to 2010. And so within the past 7 days, what is the temperature anomaly from that average? So that's what we're looking at here. And scientists, they're always using data and data visualizations to help answer questions, but also it kind of results in more questions sometimes. So this is a really important skill, not just for scientists, but for you all, because you all are scientists as well, to be able to look at data, ask questions, formulate hypothesis, maybe draw some conclusions, and probably in the end ask more questions, because that's pretty much the basis of science. So for this graph right here, you can go ahead and pop any questions that you might have about the data. But what I'm seeing is this pretty stark difference right across the country, which kind of lines up where the Rocky Mountains divide the eastern and western United States, where the eastern side of the United States has an abnormal increase in temperature anomaly from the normal, whereas the West Coast has some abnormally decreases in temperature from that normal. So again, split right down the middle, which is kind of unique due to those Rockies, and we're seeing some temperature extremes, some real differences based on climate change. The next one I wanted just to pop up just for a demo, you guys can feel free to explore this more on your own, is departure from normal precipitation. And we're going to look at it over the past 60 months. Okay, so this is pretty visually shocking, or at least it is for me. So again, right down the middle of the US, we're seeing that the East Coast, or the east side of the United States, has an increase in temperature from the normal, which again is that average from 1981 to 2010. And the West Coast, or the west side of the United States, is really seeing increases in drought, so less precipitation from normal. So this is kind of what we were talking about earlier, is that things aren't happening the same. We are expecting, especially in the Northeast, heavy extreme precipitation, whereas the west coast of the United States is really experiencing more drier conditions, drought that can lead to wildfires. Okay, and the other tool, I'm just gonna pop this open, is looking at sea level rise. So this is using the Climate Central Surging Seas Risk Zone map right here, but also there is a map that specifically looks at Jamaica Bay if you are in the Northeast New York region, that has a lot of data layers. It's really rich, so feel free to check that out on your own. But for now, we're just going to look at surging seas. Let me zoom out a bit. And we are going to be focusing on the Southeast and the Southern Great Plains, so the Gulf of Mexico, essentially. Loading here. Okay. So, oh, my mouse disappeared. Okay. So right here, you can see that you can change the different water levels to see what areas will be inundated. Right now, we're looking at the Gulf, specifically New Orleans area. You can show what it looks like without any increases in water level. So without sea level rise, you can show the current coast. So this is what it looks like today, current coast. if you are to increase this to 1 foot, you can see a massive area of this Gulf of Mexico region is already flooded. You can keep increasing to 2, 3, 4. It takes a little bit of loading, but I'll go up to 5. And you can see we're starting to thread our way up into the Mississippi, into this waterway in Mobile, Alabama. Areas of the west coast of Florida are also inundated. So right here near Tampa and St. Petersburg. So you can see water impacts from sea level rise. But this is really great because it also can show you who is impacted. You can see potentially some environmental justice issues. So social vulnerability, population, ethnicity, income, property, and landmarks are all data layers that you can put on top just to see who is impacted. I'm just going to share social vulnerability for now. And you can see the areas that, for some reason, this region isn't popping with the data, but it would be very highly socially vulnerable because we have a lot of infrastructure in this area that's already flooded out. But if you look at Florida in particular, pretty much the entire southern portion of Florida is extremely vulnerable and threatened by sea level rise. We don't today have anyone representing Hawaii, but very quickly, I just wanted to show how Hawaii is being impacted by sea level rise, specifically Oahu, which has Honolulu, which is the capital, and also has the highest amount of tourism coming in there. So they're a big profitable region. But I don't think I'm on Oahu right now. There we go. There's a lot of data, so it takes a little bit to load, but it also would probably be faster if this was the only browser open. Okay, so with 5 feet of sea level rise, we're seeing a lot of areas in Oahu being completely inundated. The social vulnerability of this area is also extremely high. You have Honolulu, which is the capital, and then an airport that's right on the water that is already flooded by 5 feet and continues to get worse as sea level rises. So feel free to explore these areas on your own. I'm sure you're curious to see how your own neighborhood is impacted by sea level rise and by precipitation and temperatures. So something to explore. And we don't have anyone representing Alaska today, but very quickly, the Arctic area, because of that Arctic amplification that I was mentioning with the loss of sea ice and the increasing in heat, they're being disproportionately impacted by climate change. So in the past 50 years, we're seeing extreme temperature changes in Alaska. They're increasing from as high as 6.2 Fahrenheit, which is absolutely wild. These really rapid increases in temperature are impacting every way of life for people that live in this area. So their economics, their livelihoods, their homes, the infrastructure. So they need to adapt quickly, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for that. All right, so we saw impacts, and that's pretty sobering. But we now want to just look at some solutions, because I think that's where we take heart in things that we can do. And Laurel and I are both very committed to sharing and talking about the fact that these solutions come at every single level. So things are not going to happen just at the international level or even just at the national level. We all have part of this. And so we thought we would just take a second and walk through what some of these things are. So for example, at the personal level, we can reduce our carbon footprint, which is a mitigation. And in addition, we could actually try and address the impacts by perhaps putting out rain barrels in our yard to deal with excess water that comes down through rain events. So we can do many things at a personal level. Then moving into a local level, there's a lot that's actually happening at the local level. A lot of municipalities are getting together to put together regulations. They're looking at education initiatives. There are even school groups, academic groups that have been banding together and looking at things. In fact, there's a group that's in New York that has worked on a no idling policy for their school pickup area. Again, you know, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it has a big impact. It's cutting those greenhouse gases. as well as there was another school group where the students got together and rallied to have plasticware removed from the cafeteria because plastic is a petroleum product. And so they advocated for the students to bring sporks every day. And, they ran a fundraising effort to get those put together and in place. So again, those are fun things that can happen at a local level. At a national level, of course, there's a lot that can be done in terms of bringing together policy and looking at impacts. I know that NOAA and the Estuarine Research Reserves have been doing a lot to look at some of the impacts around the wetland areas that border many of the coastal regions. And that's a really big asset for all of us. And then, of course, at the international level, working together to try and reduce greenhouse gases is one of the most important things that can happen. The Paris Agreement is a really important agreement that all eyes are focused on, and there's a lot of real energy around really starting to create that change. So all of these levels, again, are important. Okay, so we're going to kind of step into specific regions now and just look at what are some of the impacts that were looked at in those regions and what are some of the responses that are being considered. So for Alaska region, there are some really strong impacts from not having food security and not being able to plan your life in terms of how you move around. This can affect physically and mentally the rural groups that live in Alaska, and they're very self-reliant. So they really have a sense of trying to solve their problems themselves. And so the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium has put in place a climate and health group that is really focused on trying to help these individuals deal with food security issues. So focusing on studying emerging pests and diseases that are really threatening their local berries and local food sources, and trying to help these people deal with this in a community way, as well as looking at how to improve their understandings of the very rapid changes that are going on in their ability to travel across the landscape, which is a really important thing. A lot of these individuals work in teams. They go out hunting, fishing, and walk across ice that's normally been stable. That's changing very rapidly. So getting a better understanding of that is critically important. Next slide. Okay, we're going to go to the Northwest, and I expect most people are aware that wildfires have been an incredible problem in the Northwest in terms of impact on not only the forests, but on air quality, on water quality, on human health. It's really challenging in that area. And so trying to come to grips with how to deal with that, the Federal Forestry Service has really seen humans move right into the edge of the forest, which is really creating a big part of the problem. They've proposed forestry management issues in the past in terms of doing control burns or allowing some of the fires that naturally start to burn without immediately jumping in to stop them. And I think they're finding that there is more responsiveness to that kind of approach nowadays, now that we've seen some of the real challenges and problems that can result from not having any kind of management. So that's a critically important piece as well. And we'll move to the Southwest next. And of course, the Southwest is an area where there are tremendous drought issues. Laurel mentioned this already. We're really seeing, and we saw that wonderful map that showed us how dry these things are. So Lake Mead is a man-made lake, basically. It's created by the building of the Hoover Dam. And it's really become a reservoir that many states, as well as Mexico, are dependent on. And so there's been action on a regional level. And again, remember I said, sometimes dealing with things regionally is a real advantage. So these 7 states and Mexico have worked together to try and look at how to develop conservation measures so that one group is not overusing a resource, and all of us are cognizant of the fact that we need to really manage the resource that we have. And then we'll step to the northern Great Plains area, which is a beautiful area that has also been facing a very significant drought situation. And so they have been looking at how to better educate, how to help groups plan for a drought. So a lot of us think about droughts in a very short-term way. We're talking about droughts that can last for a long period of time, over multi-years. And in that situation, you really draw down the natural water resources that are available. And it requires a really intensive monitoring and planning program. And so that's what this National Drought Mitigation Center has been doing, working with these local groups. I'll turn it back to you, Laurel.
Okay, so the Midwest is highly productive agriculturally, and they really rely on this as a source of an economic driver for this area. But unfortunately, they're going to be and have already been experiencing heavy rains that are leading to a loss of nutrients for their cropland. So one example is Iowa State is developing this program where they use something called prairie strips to reduce the soil and nutrient loss and to increase the biodiversity of their area. The Southern Great Plains, as we had mentioned, one impact is the intensity of tropical storms. So specifically, Hurricane Harvey landed in Texas in 2017 and was devastating to this area, one of the costliest natural disasters in US history. So the Governor's Commission to Rebuild Texas was created, which was really to support this economic recovery of the area and to rebuild infrastructure for these communities, hopefully building with resiliency in mind and planning for what is to come with climate change for this region. The Southeast, as we had looked at in surging seas, is really vulnerable to sea level rise. They also, especially in the Gulf area near Louisiana, are experiencing subsidence. So the land is sinking as well, which makes this regional sea level rise so much more dramatic. So they are definitely experiencing those issues, as well as an increase in extreme rainfall. So flooding is a real challenge for this area. That doesn't just impact their economies and their tourism, but it also has a real devastating impact on human health if you have a lot of standing water. So the Acadiana Planning Commission in Louisiana is pooling together hazard reduction funds to hopefully increase flooding resilience for the future of this area. And I know other areas of the Southeast are planning for that as well. The Northeast, we're in New York, so we're experiencing extreme weather such as snowstorms, so extreme winter weather, drought, heat waves, flooding. All of these different impacts are going to have an effect on our energy, our water, and our transportation. So what we can do, cities and states are already planning for this. They're assessing their climate vulnerability and then planning and building infrastructure with resilience to prepare for this. And finally, Hawaii. There are a lot of impacts to Hawaii, but specifically ocean temperatures warming for this region have caused massive coral bleaching. So there was one big event happening in 2015 where 50% of the coral cover in Western Hawaii died due to this massive bleaching event. Coral not only is so important for the biodiversity of the area that helps fishers make a livelihood, brings in tourism, but it's a functioning part of this ecosystem, providing ecosystem services for any storms that come through. It protects them. So coral is extremely important for this area. So the state has a working group that's really focused on promoting the recovery, the restoration of coral reefs, and reducing their threats.
Okay, so just very quickly, we wanted to wrap up by telling you about this very cool tool that was developed by colleagues of ours. It's a climate resilience tool, and it's a crowdsourced tool. So it looks at New York City, and it has multiple different layers. All of these little dots actually represent either a challenge or they represent a solution to a challenge. And again, they're crowdsourced, so you can all contribute. When you see something in the New York City community, if you're in New York, you can then take a picture, upload it. If you don't take the picture, you can just upload the narrative for it. And we'll just very quickly, I'm just going to show you a couple of them. So first one is, here's an example of rain barrels that have been put out. Remember, we were just talking about how rain barrels can really help in an extreme rain event. They can help with slowing the water. They can help with water quality because of that. It can also be used to help irrigate a small garden in a house or residence. So really valuable things that are done on a personal level. And another opportunity is the Lower East Side. They're doing a traffic study. So again, they're contributing by collecting data and sharing that data so that they can look at the greenhouse gases that are at a specific intersection that are impacting their neighborhood. So these are a couple of examples. We'll skip the next couple and we're just going to go to one last slide, which is Laurel and I were part of a team that developed a set of Kahoots for those of you who play Kahoot. And if you don't, it's a really fun opportunity to learn and have a game experience at the same time. So we have developed 10 climate challenges that were all based on the National Climate Assessment. So they look at a variety of different topics, everything from climate impacts to solutions, to the polar regions, to our foods, to our oceans. So again, they are obviously free to play and available, and really provide a nice opportunity to kind of dig in and learn a little bit more. And I think with that, we're just going to pop to questions, or actually, I think Rosalba is going to speak first. So I'll turn it back to Cassie.
All right, great. Thank you, ladies. So Rosalba, if you'd like to share your screen, let's have you share some resources from NASA GISS. And for our viewers, if you have any questions for Margie and Laurel, please use the Q&A box, and they'll take questions.
Thank you, Cassie. Hello, everyone. So yeah, my name is Rosalba, and I am happy to be here to share about some additional NASA resources to help you learn about climate change. So I am going to put on the chat some links. One sec. Oh, the chat is disabled. Okay. Well, so the 3 resources that I want to share with you are Earth Minute, the Sea Level Rise iQuest, and Earth Now. And if maybe the chat becomes enabled in a little bit, then I will throw the links to this. So yeah, so the first one, Earth Minute, is a whiteboard animation series that explains, as the name implies, in about a minute, it explains a different aspect of Earth science. There are many topics associated to climate change. So for example, you can learn about greenhouse gases and about sea level rise. They're pretty fun. So I definitely suggest for you to watch those. Oops, I think the chat is available now. So let me put the links there. Thank you for that. And the next resource that I want to share about is the Sea Level iQuest. So as our presenters were talking about before, sea level rise is an important impact of climate change. And so with this iQuest, you can work through different visualizations, videos, articles, and other activities to learn about how satellite observations can help us better understand sea level rise, both at the global scale and also at the regional level. And the third tool is Earth Now. So this is a pretty cool interactive app. So it lets you see real-time data visualizations of different aspects of Earth. So for example, Earth temperature, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, sea level, and so on. So I'm going to try to go ahead and click on that to show you how it looks like. I find it very, very fun. It just takes a little bit to load. And so again, it's very interactive. You can zoom in or out in a region that you're interested in. You can also find information about the satellites that are taking the measurements for different vital signs of our planet. So for example, you can look at Earth temperature, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, sea level, soil moisture, ozone, water vapor. So again, a pretty fun tool if you want to explore that. And yeah, that's it for me today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Rosalba. And when we wrap up, we'll make sure that all the resources and links that Margie and Laurel shared, as well as Rosalba shared, will be posted and sent out with the recording. So for our folks who are left, are there any additional questions for Margie or Laurel? Check out the Q&A box. I see we have our question about the cahoots addressed. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, if people don't have questions, I do want to encourage you to spend some time with the National Climate Assessment if you haven't. I can't emphasize enough how easy it is to get lost in it. There's an awful lot of really great material there. It's very visual. You know, you really, as you saw from some of the graphics that we grabbed, but there are some pictures, there are even videos. It was put together by a group of educators, and we worked on it hard across the country from different agencies. And I think that it really ended up being a very useful tool. So I would encourage you all to spend some time with it.
All right, well, great, thank you. And thank you to our viewers for joining in. If you are exploring and if you have questions, let us know. We're always happy to answer questions. And as I said, this recording will be made available along with all the links. Just give us a day or two and we'll send it out to everyone who's registered. Margie, Laurel, and Rosalba, thank you so much for your time. And thanks for sharing this really important piece with us. All right. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon or evenings, wherever you are. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay, bye.